Hello and welcome to the research update on non-antibiotic control of fire blight webinar by eOrganic. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with eExtension. You can find all of our published articles, videos, and our many upcoming and recorded webinars on organic farming and research topics on our website at extension.org/organic_production. We're very glad to have Ken Johnson back with us again today. Ken is a professor of plant pathology at Oregon State University here in Corvallis, Oregon. In addition, our speakers include Rachel Elkins, who is a University of California Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor located in Lake County, California. Also speaking with us is Tim Smith, who is a Washington State University Cooperative Extension Area Agent located in Chelan County in Wenatchee, Washington. This group has been involved with fire blight management for over 20 years.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Ken Johnson, Oregon State, and I think we have Tim. Are you out there, Tim?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Tim Smith, Washington State, and Rachel. Are you muted or?
I just unmuted to say hello.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we're going to go back over some of the things we went over last year, and a little bit of new material.
Muted.
Just sort of where we're standing with this project, and there's a. I think most of the people listening know that there's a National Organic Standards Board meeting in Portland in about 3 weeks, and the role of antibiotics in fire blight control is going to be discussed at that meeting, and so we're trying to kind of give people an update where we are, and so that they have the most current information as to where we are with the project of developing non-antibiotic approaches to fire blight control. Let's see. Okay, so here's our rationale. Is that it was 2011 that National Organic Standards Board set a sunset of 2014 for streptomycin and oxytetracycline in use in organic palm fruit production, and the industry has petitioned to reinstate a normal sunset review process, and this is what will be discussed in Portland in a few weeks. And our focus again is on floral infection and susceptible cultivars. We're looking at in Washington State alone about 20,000 acres of organic orchards planted primarily to susceptible cultivars. And if antibiotics are sunsetted, they're left wondering what they're going to do for fire blight control. So we're working on that. That's our focus. It's a short-term focus, but that's what we feel we need to work on at this point. So strategies and data shown are most applicable to the regions that we work in, which is the western United States, and it's not to say that it's not applicable to the eastern U.S. as well, but we don't work in those systems, and there are some differences in climate and other pests and things that are out there. And we're not talking about host resistance, which is the ideal but longer-term goal, and we're not talking so much about management of host susceptibility. I think most growers know what they can do about fire blight in terms of withholding water and things like that if they get infections, or sort of keeping nitrogen levels in trees down to reduce susceptibility. But so we're not going to say much about that. So we're going to talk about primarily floral infection in susceptible cultivars. Just skipped one there. So I just want to put this picture in, a picture of fire blight, and this was last year in the Yakima Valley, and pretty significant primary bloom infection period in Yakima Valley, and this grower was hit really hard. And you can see there's fruit there. The fruit will get picked, but this tree is going to be in pretty tough shape coming around to this next season. And yields will be down, and the losses add up, and you can see the expense of fire blight as well, of just keeping these trees healthy, and over the course of a summer and then into the next year, and because the blight will probably come back, especially after an infection event like that. The disease cycle here quickly. Those cankers you saw on the previous slide are going to leave behind. Are going to stop by fall, and are going to leave behind an old canker. And during the winter, everybody tries to prune these things out, but they don't get them all. And it's because many of them are very small, or they're in a strategic place on a tree where you've got a lot of important limbs coming out, and people will sometimes leave them. But most of the time they try to get as many of these as they can, but you just don't get them all. And the bacteria then comes out of these old cankers in the springtime and then jumps into the flowers, and that's what gets it going. And what really gets it going then is temperature, and insect movement will then move the bacteria from flower to flower. So it goes around in what we call the floral epiphytic phase, and this is primarily temperature driven. And Tim developed a model years ago called cougar blight, and cougar blight is primarily modeling this buildup of the bacteria in the flowers, and temperature drives bacterial growth. They divide more quickly, and it also, bees move and work faster as temperature drives. And so the bacteria then, and you'll see in some slides that in Rachel's study how the bacteria build up in the flowers over time. And then once we get bacteria built up in the flowers, we get some kind of a wetting event at the end of that period, whether it be a rain or even a light dew can do it. And the dew then washes the bacteria off the stigmas where it's primarily growing. The stigmas is the place where the pollen grains germinate and fertilize the flower. The bacteria slides down the stigma down into the base of the flower, what we call the floral cup or the nectary, and then the bacteria swims in little openings in the floral cup, and then that's what gives you infection. So we're going to just talk, we tried to simplify this from last year, and we're just going to talk about a few materials in this talk. And it's not to say that other materials aren't important. It's just that these are the things we've sort of focused on, and we're seeing that they work, and we're getting very good results with these materials. And so this is what we're going to focus on in this talk. And so Rachel's been at a big study now, and we're into this for the 4th year now, looking at pre-bloom treatments of copper. This would be NOP approved fixed coppers, and they're part of a control program, but they're just the beginning of a control program. And we've gotten some interesting results with this in California, and she's going to talk about that. Sort of moving to early bloom, we've been doing a lot of work with over the years with Bloom Time Biological. Again, it's not a standalone product, but it colonizes stigmas just like the bacteria, the fire blight bacteria does, and it again works to suppress the amount of fire blight bacteria you can grow in an orchard, grow up in the flowers in that floral epiphytic phase. Talk a little bit about lime sulfur and fish oil. We've been looking at this, and in Washington State primarily, it's used as a thinning agent in early bloom, and we've been trying to understand its role in fire blight control, and we've gotten some pretty good information on that. Kind of moving on through bloom here, we're going to talk about Blossom Protect, and this was a new material in 2012, and it's been giving us very good to excellent fire blight control in our research plots. A few growers got to try it last year, and 2013 is going to be really the first year that this material is used sort of extensively, or it gets into wide use with industry, and we're going to see quite a bit of it, I think, sprayed this spring. And it's been giving us very good to excellent control. And then sort of this full bloom and beyond, and we're talking about a research tool that would go into situations like where fire blight would end up after a hailstorm or some kind of a wound type impact or summer type. And we've been working with a new copper product from Gowan, and it's going to have the name Provisto. And it gives us excellent fire blight control, better than other coppers we've worked with in the past, and Tim's going to talk about this. It still needs an EPA registration and an NOP OMRI approval, but the company has said that the components of their formulation of the copper material have been accepted as organic, and so they're expecting that this EPA registration will come about sometime in 2013. So sort of back to our disease cycle slide again. So we're talking about fixed coppers put on to these old cankers just prior to bloom. We're talking about lime sulfur put on in the very first parts of bloom to thin flowers out as they open, so that you get less fruit per tree, and then the fruit are bigger, and bigger fruit are worth more. Talking about biologicals to suppress this floral epiphytic phase. And then we're talking about soluble copper used primarily as the substitute for oxytetracycline in the west, or streptomycin in the east. And this material then would be used at these later phases, and also at sort of in this full bloom to petal fall period. So questions we've been asking, and some of these relate back to what we talked about last year. When does fire blight become active? And does delayed dormant copper affect this fire blight activity? Second question is, how does bloom thinning, and this would be an apple, affect fire blight control? And then lastly, this idea of integrated control, can we achieve effective non-antibiotic control? So these are really the questions that we've been trying to answer. And this is going to be about delayed dormant copper and when does fire blight become active in the orchard. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel here in a second. But the way we do this is that the bag of flowers that you see there is Rachel's work. She and her scouts go out into orchards, and they scout these orchards, and they were filling these bags full of flowers, and then they send them to me and my technician Todd, and Todd then runs a quick molecular test on these bags of flowers, and the molecular test is called LAMP. It stands for loop-mediated isothermal amplification of DNA. It's a long acronym, or a shorter acronym for a long thing, and it's like a PCR test, but it's simpler, and someday we would hope that we could do this in orchards just on site, and that's kind of what we're going for. But right now we still do it in a lab, and we get an answer pretty quickly as to whether or not the fire blight pathogen is in this bag of flowers. And by doing these samples then over the period of the bloom period, we understand when fire blight is really getting going in flowers. And I'm going to turn it over to Rachel here now, and then she's going to kind of tell us what we've been doing here.
Okay, thank you, Ken, for that good introduction, especially since I have a hard time spelling out what LAMP is, or even. But we got started on the delayed dormant copper some years ago. It's an old technique in apples, but really hasn't been adopted for pears. The reason we began putting it in, what we decided to do just for convenience sake, was to put it in with our standard delayed dormant oil treatments. It just made it so that there's one less pass through the orchard with a special treatment. We've used a couple of different materials. We started out with Coside 3000, and we've gone to the Badge X2, which is the combination material you see here. We use label rate we basically use the dormant bat canker rate, or bacterial blast rate on the label. And your slide has been changed now at 6 pounds per acre. I don't particularly think it's going to matter which trade name of material you use. Of course, it has to be organically acceptable if you are organic, but what matters is how long the copper remains active in the buds, because you're trying to suppress inoculum over a period of time, and you want it to stay active through the rainfall until you actually have fire blight activity. And we've done this now. We're entering our 4th year. It originally started out a 3-year project. In 2012, we didn't get the same type of data as we got in 2010 and 2011, because we had a much, much more extended period of time and a lot of rainfall, and we don't feel the material stayed active as long as it had in previous. It had to be active for a much longer period than it did in 2010 and 2011. So you can see the pattern of how we collect the blossoms in our field, and these are clusters, and then we collect them, and we send them up to Todd, and he does the LAMP assay for us. So it's worked out very well. So on slide 10, that shows you kind of summarizes the LAMP survey data from 2010 and 2011. And what you can see there is there was a very good statistical difference between the amount of pathogen detected in the clusters with and without the delayed dormant copper. Where you applied the oil alone, which are the dark diamonds, you can see that there's about a 50% more detectable inoculum than when you added the copper into the oil at delayed dormant timing. So that showed us that we were getting inoculum suppression. And you can see here also that in the very early part of the season, which is cooler, you don't have the heat buildup yet, you don't have the inoculum buildup yet. There isn't the difference in treatments, but as you go into full bloom and petal fall, and then in post-petal fall, in California, we have an extended petal fall season. You can see that the inoculum is building up to higher levels where you don't have the delayed dormant copper. So we feel that it is successful in suppressing the amount of inoculum. And we got this the same pattern 2 out of the 3 years, and we decided now we're going into a 4th year. In one orchard this year, we just put on delayed dormant copper last week, so we think we're going to have a nice short period of time between the time that the delayed dormant copper was sprayed and when we're going to start getting fire blight activity. That's it for that one. So one of the biggest issues, of course, with the copper is, does it cause russet? The growers, we're interested in that because most growers really want to be selling into the fresh market. They can't tolerate russet on Bartlett pears. And most people believe that Bartlett pears is naturally a very clean skin variety, but actually it is genetically a russeted variety. And so I've worked closely with Steve Lindau at UC Berkeley for many years, who on biological control of fire blight, and looking also at russeting of these different agents. And we have not had statistical difference between this timing of copper and just the oil alone. So I feel pretty confident that we're not going to see russeting due to the delayed dormant copper, and this has been the same for a couple of materials now. That's that. So let's see. So basically, I think that's basically what we've done. We only apply once, I should say that. It's a one-time spray. And so what we have shown using the LAMP surveys is that we can see when the fire blight pathogen is actually present in the clusters, and that really does help us know that when we need to be really vigilant about making sure we're on top of things, and also it does validate our models. And yes, the delayed dormant copper, we feel, has shown to delay the timing of when you're going to see a buildup of inoculum in the field. And we hope then that you can actually then, in the end, reduce the number of in-season sprays that you're putting on. And that's it for my part, I believe.
Okay. Can you hear me? I think I'm back again.
Yep.
All right. Now I'm trying to jump my slides forward, but they're not jumping forward. Oh, there we go. All right, so think about questions on LAMP and delayed dormant copper. Jumping again here now, come on. All right, so the next thing is bloom thinning with
Unmuted.
And some of the questions we wanted to know is that does it provide a benefit to fire blight suppression? And so we really want to know what the benefits are, and is lime sulfur bactericidal. So if it is bactericidal, it pretty much is going to be doing a good job during that early part of bloom that when the lime sulfur is going on, and we don't have to put other products on at that point. And so the typical protocol that we've been working with lime sulfur, and it's kind of an average protocol when you get out there and talk to people. Everybody's got a little bit different ideas about how to do this, and some people put it on a third spray, maybe on the top half of the tree, and I've heard growers say band on their lime sulfur depending on where the flowers are opening. But the The typical protocol we're thinking about is lime sulfur at king bloom open, which is about 20% bloom, and then repeated in about 3 days later at about 70–80% bloom. So this is fairly early in the bloom period. And then after that, we're thinking about this is when fire blight control with other products would begin. John, my computer wants to
Okay,
do.
sorry. If you
When
could
do you
just,
want to take the control, and I'll just tell you next.
yeah, or just try to click once on the screen again, and you may be able to get
Okay.
it back. So I think it went off for a second. There we go.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So this is work that we presented last year, just looking at what lime sulfur alone can do as a fire blight control agent at those timings early in bloom. So
Muted.
these are experimental trials here, and we get a lot of strikes on the tree because we're inoculating these trees. And we're not inoculating the trees in this case until after we're done spraying lime sulfur. And lime sulfur has a very short residual time in the orchard. So the punch from the lime sulfur is when it goes on, and then it quickly dissipates and isn't very effective anymore. And then after that is when we're putting the pathogen on, and you can see here. So this would be a case where a grower did thinning, and then the fire blight pathogens really started to build after the thinning events went on. And so you can see here we're getting on these various trials, we're getting a lot of disease. So 130 strikes per tree, 175 strikes per tree, almost 200 strikes per tree. This is in the controls. And then we've got on a fairly effective control here called where we're putting on a blight ban product, which we call integrated control, which is a biological, and then oxytet, and that gives us fairly good control. So you can see how far we're taking the level of control down. And then lime sulfur by itself. And so this we think is just primarily a thinning event. And so the reason that we see this reduction in fire blight from the lime sulfur treatments early, we think is primarily due to the fact that we're just taking flowers out. We're burning them out with the lime sulfur, and it results in fewer flowers to affect. So that's one component of lime sulfur that we've been able to measure. A second component was looking at what's the direct effect of lime sulfur on the fire blight pathogen. And here we do the experiment the opposite way. We put the fire blight pathogen on the flowers, and then we spray the lime sulfur over the top. So we come back a day later and spray lime sulfur onto trees that we put the fire blight pathogen on. So if we go out there when 60% of the flowers are open, and then say at 70 to 80% flowers open, we put lime sulfur on, what effect does that have on the population of the fire blight pathogen that builds in the flowers? And so the samples here, and there's about 75 flowers in each of these samples, so they're big samples, and the sample times are sort of in the period between full bloom and petal fall. And this is a log scale here, but I put some numbers in here where the little arrows are pointing. It's at that point there would be 1 million cells per flower, fire blight pathogen flowers. If we get it down to here, then we're down to 10,000 cells per flower. And so the treatments here are UTC, means untreated control. So those flowers only get the pathogen sprayed on them. And then we have rates of lime sulfur that are used for thinning, and the rates depend somewhat on the amount of flowers that are out there in the orchard. That depends on year, and also on the cultivar. So all of these rates are used by different growers in different ways. But I would say this lime sulfur and fish oil, each at 2%, is probably the most common. But then people will use lime sulfur by itself at higher rates. But you can see that all of the treatments are having a very dramatic effect on the fire blight pathogen in the flowers. So if the fire blight pathogen was there in early bloom, at the times that you would be using lime sulfur, you are having a significant effect on the population that's building. And because of this, we feel that when people are using lime sulfur, they're getting their thinning on early in flowering, that this is really all they need to be worried about, is getting their thinning done, and that other components of the fire blight program can begin after that second lime sulfur treatment. And so we're finding that lime sulfur is bactericidal, which hasn't been something that's easy to find in the literature, and I think is pretty useful information. Okay. So this next slide just shows the same thing for, but for the biological control agents that you would spray. The effect isn't as dramatic, but if you were to say put on bloom time biological at early bloom and then spray lime sulfur over the top, you are on average taking the population of bloom time biological down out there. It's not as dramatic as it is on the fire blight pathogen. And the same thing with Blossom Protect, which is the yeast material. If you put Blossom Protect on out there before you put lime sulfur and then come back with lime sulfur over the top, you're having a detrimental effect on the yeast populations in the flower. So we think that if you just get your lime sulfur done and then turn to products like Bloom Time or Blossom Protect after you've done the lime sulfur, you're in better shape if you go that way. So our recommendation is really to delay the biologicals till after the second lime sulfur treatment. All right, so that's bloom thinning. That's pretty much went over that last year. That there was new information where we're talking about the direct effects of lime sulfur on the fire blight pathogen and on the biocontrol agents. All right, so next kind of topic, and I went over this last year too, is integrated control. And this is the idea of sort of targeting materials to different parts of the flower. So when we talked about the floral epiphytic phase, we talked about growth of the pathogen on stigmas, so that if we get a material like Bloom Time biological on those stigmas, we can slow down the increase of the pathogen population on the stigmas. And then we talk about putting material into the floral cup, and this is where oxytetracycline and streptomycin have been so effective, is that they make a residue down in this lower part of the flower, and that prevents infection by fire blight. And so we got on this some years ago where we put on biologicals, say Bloom Time biological or Blight Ban A506, and then followed that with oxytetracycline. And we found that we got better control with this combination. One treatment of a biological than one treatment of an antibiotic was better than two treatments of an antibiotic or two treatments of a biological, and we called this integrated control. So, and we believe it's because the biological is targeting the stigmas, and that the oxytetracycline is primarily targeting this lower part of the flower. And so we've adapted this now with non-antibiotic approaches and looking at programs like Bloom Time Biological and Blossom Protect, which would be a program for pears, or just lime sulfur and fish oil because we're impacting stigmas, we're burning out stigmas with lime sulfur, and then Blossom Protect, which would be a program for apples. And here's some data on this. It's the same kind of slide I just showed you. The same lime sulfur data that I just showed you in 2 slides back is on here. So the little red arrows here are pointing at, say, now lime sulfur and fish oil, and then Blossom Protect. So we could do our thinning, and then we put on the yeast. So the yellow bar is Blossom Protect after lime sulfur, and you can see that these little yellow bars have about the same level as streptomycin does in our trials. And we use a streptomycin sensitive strain when we inoculate our trees, so we don't have any resistance problems out there with our pathogen. And so we're getting very good control with streptomycin, but we're also getting very good control with the yeast material. And Tim has done a lot of work with Blossom Protect, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim right here and let him talk to you about this slide.
Yeah, back in about 2008, I was asked to test the biological, and I do inoculated plots where I take the bacteria and jam them basically in high numbers down the flowers' throats into the nectaries, and you don't expect a biological to perform very well under those circumstances. So I reluctantly agreed to test this product. And lo and behold, it performed very well. So if you highlight what I had there on those bars, are the percent control compared to the untreated check. And anything that's 78, 80% or better, I consider to be a very effective product in the actual use in the field. Through the years, that's proven to be true with antibiotics and all sorts of things. The blue bars are the percent control that I've received over the years. As you can see, the 08, 09, 10, 11, 12. And that box is around the better performing ones. And in general, I was testing this product at different rates and different amounts of the additive that goes in with this spray. And every time I followed their directions, it worked very well. So the work had already been done. This yeast-like substance had already been found to be effective in trials in Europe, and they had sort of worked out the rates and the use of this buffering product that acts as a nutrient to the yeast. And when I followed their directions, I got very good results. When I didn't follow their directions or tried to use other kinds of additives, it didn't work so very well. So that's one thing that we came away from this. One, that it's effective, and secondly, that we should be using the full rates and later on in the bloom especially to get the results. So Ken and I both have had similar results with this Blossom Protect Aurea Basidium pullulans yeast, and that it's been performing up there with the big boys. And it does so consistently, especially when you follow the directions.
Yeah, and the thing that's different about it is that it colonizes the nectary. And so we took some pictures last spring of some pear flowers. The nectary, you can get a good look at the nectary in a pear flower with a scanning electron microscope, and you get this kind of a biofilm over the nectary. And so it grows in the nectar, but like bloom time biological, the bacterial biocontrol agents really don't like that nectar to grow in because it's high sugar concentration, so high osmoticum. So it's kind of like a jelly or something. You might see molds growing on top of your jelly, but you don't see bacteria growing there very well. And so the yeast, all these little dots on here are the yeast, and making this film on the nectary. And we've gone on and sort of measured this out. So we just looked at numbers of floral cups that are colonized by the yeast, and in our orchards we get just essentially every floral cup gets colonized by the yeast, whereas we also measure in the same floral cups whether or not the bloom time bacteria colonizes those floral cups, and it doesn't. It colonizes the stigmas, and it grows on the stigmas fairly well, but we look down in this floral cup and the reason, I guess I go back again, the reason we focus on this floral cup is that's where the fire blight pathogen is actually going to infect the flower. So protecting that, especially late in bloom as those pathogens, as the inoculum builds, is really important. So here's one, maybe Tim and Rachel, you can jump on here too. And so we did a trial last year just looking at how well Blossom Protect would cover flowers in different environments. So this is Todd, my technician, and we did a trial in pears, and we did a trial in apples, and Tim over here did a trial in apples, and Rachel did a trial in pears. And the kind of what we were trying to do was, so we had a control, and which was no treatment, put on Blossom Protect and its buffer at 20% or 80%, or putting on it both, and we just got remarkable colonization of flowers with this material. And you can see that many of our control flowers are also being colonized, and we think that this is primarily due to insect pollinators, bees, moving the yeast around. Once it gets on the trees that we spray, it's starting to move around to other flowers and flowers that open after the treatment's made. So you can see that even just putting it on at 20% bloom was fairly effective. We end up with most of the flowers on a tree colonized by the yeast. 80% bloom, or putting it on twice, was extremely effective, and essentially all the flowers on these trees got colonized. And then you can look at, say, our controls where we didn't spray it on the trees at all, and in most of the trials, those are also getting colonized by the yeast, and that would be due to bee movement. And Rachel had a busy spring in 2012, and we didn't actually sample her fruit until June, and she says, "You really want my fruit now?" And I said, "Yeah, send them up. We'll just cut the calyxes off and we'll wash them." And you can see that once this yeast gets on the flowers, it's a fairly tenacious organism. So here we are, we're washing thumb-sized pears, and yet these were treatments that were made just when the flowers were just opening, and yet we can still find the yeast in high numbers on all of these fruit as it goes into the summer.
I think we should mention that this yeast is a natural organism. It's found in the flowers of trees in the Pacific Northwest, at least, and it's very common.
It's very common, yeah. In fact, one of the risks of this organism is a potential that there could be some fruit russet with it because it is a fairly aggressive organism. And Tim, maybe you could say something about what you've seen. The slide I'm showing here is from Germany. So this is from data of Stefan Kuntz, and he was the German scientist that adapted these yeasts for use in fire blight control, and I guess the inventor of Blossom Protect. And in German production area, which is around Lake Constance, which is a fairly more like a Michigan type production area, they have seen some russeting on the fruit from the yeast material, but they tend to only see it once they get the treatments up to fairly high numbers, and also fairly late, so that the numbers are on the x-axis are Blossom Protect at 1, 2, 3, or 4, and that would be timings. So that'd be like mid bloom, full bloom, late full bloom, and petal fall. And where I've got the red circle there is sort of where they put it on 3 or 4 times, and that's where they sort of see this little bump up in the russet index. And our experience with is that probably 2 applications would be as many as anybody would probably want to put on. And there's some other, and we're going to talk about Gowan's copper here in a second. And Tim, you might talk about russet that you've seen in Wenatchee, which is not what you haven't seen in Wenatchee.
Yeah, I'd like to point out on this slide that the difference between the russeted and the non-russeted is minuscule.
Yeah.
The untreated versus the treated, and also that Lake Constance has a dreary, wet, cool climate, which is conducive to russet, whereas the arid western United States has much drier conditions and less rain during the spring and early summer. And what we looked for every time we sprayed the Blossom Protect and the copper that I'll talk about in a minute, was an increase in russet, and we didn't find it at all.
Right.
It's very difficult to russet anything in a dry climate.
Yeah.
Can I just spin a little bit when Tim's finished?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, in California, we did see russet in 2011. It was kind of our primary red flag with Blossom Protect, was because we had a lot of rain in 2011. We probably saw it in most of our Blossom Protect treatments. But in 2012, where we had a drier year, the only increase in russet was when we did have 3 applications, starting at 10% bloom and going to pre-petal fall. So where we just had 1 application, either early or late, we didn't see it. But in 2011, where we did have extended rainfall that year, we did see that. That is sort of our primary nervousness with Blossom Protect is the russeting, but we do get more rain in the spring than they do in Wenatchee during bloom time.
Yes, and this organism is actually implicated as a russeter.
Yeah.
It's the natural organism that's on the surface skin of fruit, and if it's a wet, cool spring, you're likely to see more because you're adding more of this russeting agent organism to the orchard. And I think this is a big issue in the eastern U.S. and in Europe, not in the Pacific Northwest.
And so think about questions about the yeast. Rachel's going to set up commercial scale trials to look at russeting again in pears in California in 2013. So we're still working with this material, and we're still really interested in this question. The last material I want to talk about is this Gowan material, Provisto, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim again because he's done the most work with it, and he'll just go through the slides here. Hello, Tim.
Yeah, to get my mute off, we have tested copper extensively over the years. You know, the normal style of copper, the copper hydroxides and copper sulfate-based products. And we've never been highly impressed with the results. That you can suppress the amount of fire blight that you get, that your outcome is more in the 60% range instead of the 80% or better that we'd like to see. So this new copper product came along. It was being developed for use in Florida for a bacterial disease of citrus. And the local representatives had us try it on fire blight. And right from the very start, it performed extremely well. So we've been pretty impressed with it. We've been concerned about the effect of copper causing increased russet, just like the yeast. And so we've done everything we can in timing different fruits, different cultivars of pears and apples and cherries, and different timings at different rates, and we have yet to have a significant russet problem. This is going to probably work out a lot like the yeast product, in that if you spray it on a cool spring with a lot of moisture, you'll probably increase the russet. But if you put it on during good drying conditions and during warm weather, it's not nearly as likely as the old products. And here's the efficacy for this one. And once again, go ahead and hit it. And when we tested the higher rates, 3 or 4 quarts an acre, we had consistently excellent results that performed up there with the antibiotics, or even better. And hit it again. And when we tested the lower rates, we had consistently worse results. So during this work, we're just determining the rates that we're going to use and recommend in the field. And one of the real positive aspects of this copper is that it's only 3% copper. And we do have concerns about the overuse of copper in agriculture. And so compared to the 40 or 50% copper that's going on in quite a few pounds an acre, this is a 3% copper going on in low rates. And it just seems to be more active on the fire blight pathogen than the fixed coppers. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what we wanted to say, and we've kind of brought you through
Unmuted.
just sort of a really simple program that we think can be effective as a non-antibiotic program for fire blight control. And I've kind of put the main conclusions up here, and then I want to kind of switch to the sort of where we stand in terms of making this a package that can be picked up by a grower tomorrow in the next slide. So utilizing delayed dormant fixed copper primarily in orchards with a history of fire blight. In some of Rachel's orchards, that's every year. In other orchards in the Northwest, it's not every year, but you're really targeting the places where the pathogen overwinters with those delayed dormant coppers. So if the orchard was completely clean, I don't know if that treatment would be needed. You still have a fire blight risk, but then that's when the pathogen comes in up over the fence on a bee or some other insect that carries it over the fence, or a rainstorm or something like that. Second thing is that in apples, using lime sulfur to thin and to delay the pathogen buildup in flowers. It seems to be that lime sulfur is having an impact on fire blight control, and in apples, especially in a non-antibiotic program, this then shortens the period where you need other fire blight control materials and makes the control programs easier. In pears, we think that non-antibiotic control is probably going to be a little bit more difficult, and that's because pears are more susceptible to fire blight than apples, and because we don't have this lime sulfur treatment that we can go in there with. But we would begin with a bacterial biocontrol agent like bloom time biological, and then to delay the buildup of the pathogen on the stigmas, and then switch to blossom protect and copper as we get later in bloom to protect those floral cups from infection. So utilizing the yeast near full bloom to protect the flora cup, and this yeast is going to grow on the flowers, and it's going to spread flower to flower, and it seems to be a very effective material. And then this soluble copper at later bloom to substitute for oxytetracycline is sort of the final piece of this, and this is new information that we didn't talk about much last year. And this Gowan copper in particular, the Provisto, if it gets an organic approval and an EPA registration, looks ideally suited for this, and it would in my estimation would be as effective as oxytetracycline is for control. So I got one more slide here, and it sort of is where we stand in this in terms of delivering the program, out into the commercial orchards. And Rachel will tell you that we're getting word back to us, and word doesn't always come back to us as fast as we'd like. But there's a lot of people that are using delayed dormant copper this year, and this is something we started on in 2009. So this is 2013. So it's sort of taken about 3 years of our efforts in getting the word out, and we're starting to see a significant uptake in grower acceptance of and adoption of the practice. And so I think Rachel might have a comment about that. Lime sulfur is really only Washington has a specific label for lime sulfur for thinning. They have a local, what's called 24C label from the EPA that says, yes, you can use lime sulfur for thinning. No other state in the nation has a direct label that says, yes, you can use lime sulfur for thinning. You can use lime sulfur, and especially in organic agriculture, you can use lime sulfur for disease control. And if a grower said, well, I have some powdery mildew I have to get in early bloom, or I have some apple scab I have to get in early bloom, they could spray lime sulfur in this fashion. Though I guess I don't have a lot of information on how common people are thinking about lime sulfur as part of a fire blight control program in organic apples outside of the state of Washington. And so that's sort of another kind of a sort of a limitation we have on this, that really only one state has a really adopted lime sulfur in early bloom as a treatment for inorganic fruit, and its use for thinning. The yeast just got a registration last year in 2012, and so the grower experience with it is been very small till now, and fire blight control at an orchard scale there's been just very little experience with it. The price is about double antibiotics. That's maybe not such a big deal, but it is a factor. And so far, we believe that it's really fairly safe material in the West, and that's based on again on research trials. But again, so the data is a bit limited on that, and we're still the jury's kind of out on what we think about it for pears. Finally, Provisto, this bloom safe copper, we're calling it, does not have a registration, does not have an NOP approval, and we're thinking those are going to come in 2013. No grower experience, really no orchard scale trials yet with the material, though many growers have used copper in the past. Don't know what it's going to cost, and it looks at this point that at least that it's safe for apples and in the Northwest, in the West, in the Northwest. I think pear, we don't have enough data yet to completely be sure on pear. Tim and Rachel, you want to say anything?
I guess
well, that looks pretty complete.
Yeah, it sounds complete to me. Yes, we have growers that are, we have a lot of growers putting the copper on this year.
Has delayed dormant.
So it's delayed dormant, yeah.
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 So I think that we feel that, you know, our ultimate conclusion is that, yeah, that this is doable, but we still have this sort of you know, the adoption delay or whatever, and whenever you try to get knowledge and information to a wider scale, that there's always this time delay. And I guess that we're still sort of dealing with that time delay and then also getting a full understanding of what the risks are. We still don't have all the risks, I think, put together.
Okay, thanks, Ken. We're about to begin our question and answer session. So the first question, what do Europeans generally use for the prevention of fire blight?
Tim, you want that one?
Yeah, I could try that. The incidence of fire blight in Europe is not high, and it's a good thing. They use copper, and they have relied on antibiotics during severe events. They need special permission to use antibiotics, and very often by the time they get permission to use them, it's too late. You need to be able to respond quickly, and they don't. Mostly they escape fire blight, and at any place that, because of their weather. And so any place that doesn't have very much fire blight, when the good weather does come around, there is very little carryover fire blight in the area, so they don't have the bacteria, even though the weather is correct. It's places like the eastern U.S. where fire blight occurs frequently, that the pressure is on every year, and every time that the weather is correct, then they're in danger of infection. Europe is mostly not in that situation.
Yeah, I'll do a quick follow-up. Was at a conference in Leavenworth, Washington last summer, and there was a Swiss pomologist there, and I gave basically some version of this talk, and we talked afterwards, and he says that they don't have lime sulfur in apples, and but they're using some blossom protect. This would be in organic apples now. So they're using some blossom protect, and they also use this stone powder. I think it's called like micacin or something like that, and they feel like they get fairly good results with that material in organic production. You're talking about pretty big rates of material to put that stuff on, and I don't think we really want to go there. You know, we're talking about, you know, something like kaolin clay during flowering, and I don't really. We've done kaolin trials for fire blight and gotten results in the past, but it's a lot of material has to go on the tree, and I don't think we really want to go in that direction.
Do you have any recommendations for growers in the Northeast?
Well, I don't hear Rachel or Tim jumping in. You know, well, so our focus in our research trials this spring is going to look at integrating blossom protect and copper, and we're going to do a lot of measurement of what happens to yeast populations under that kind of a scenario. And so in the Northeast, the primary constraint that we're not dealing with so much in our systems that people have in the Northeast is apple scab. So you're trying to get your apple scab sprays on, and then you're also worrying about fire blight at the same time. And so if you're going to put on a lot of sulfur and lime sulfur on the trees at various periods later than what we've been talking about, you're going to have some impacts on the yeast, that if you were to use the yeast. But you could see from our slides that you didn't knock the yeast off with the lime sulfur, and so I would still think that the yeast would probably have a fit in eastern systems. It may not be as prominent as it can be in western systems. And then the other part of this then would be this Provisto material is looking pretty darn good, and it would be a nice material for fire blight in the Northeast, and also would probably give you some additional benefit in scab control as well.
I could make one comment on back east. I know it's not officially, you know, it's not a formal part, and Ken mentioned at the beginning about resistant varieties, but the only U.S. pear breeding program long time is at the Carneysville, West Virginia in ARS, and specifically their focus is on fire blight resistance, and so you have a really limited amount of pear acreage in the East Coast and in Michigan, simply because fire blight really is the huge limiting factor. So they really haven't come up with a program that they can utilize successfully over the long term, except for, they are really looking toward resistant varieties, which may or may not be commercially acceptable. It still needs to be, but when there is a new commercial resistant variety, they have to show the most interest in adopting that. But fire blight really is the limiting factor for eastern pear growers.
Yeah, we should mention that resistance in pome fruits like apples and pears is a comparative statement. It's like it's less damaged when infected than something that's susceptible. But we don't have any immune apples or pears that don't get infected. And even the most resistant ones that we have can get significant infection and damage.
Okay, we have quite a few more questions coming in. How delayed can the delayed dormant copper application be put on? How much green tissue or bud opening can be present?
Well, I guess I'll answer that. We have that conversation a lot, and we have actually the later you can apply it closer to bloom, I think the more successful you'll be in suppressing your inoculum level, reducing your initial inoculum load, but you increase the russet and potential. But I'm finding that there are some growers now that are pushing the envelope a little bit harder. If they're less prone to russet conditions, we actually had an application go on last week. Some buds were showing a little bit of green and even early cluster already. For the most part, our applications on the North Coast here were applied at the end of February, and that would be in the true delay dormant stage. I would have to say then that the reminder is that the idea was to put it in with the delayed dormant oil, which is bud swell, but when there hasn't been any scales showing yet, open scales. So it's really going to depend on how tolerant, how risk prone or averse the grower is, the variety they're growing. Of course, if they're growing bosque, they may want to have a little bit more russet on bosque, but on a Bartlett or a comice, you might want to be cleaner. So like I say, this year I did have one grower put it on relatively late. Most of them go on at the true delayed dormant.
Okay. Ken, this is a question for Ken. There was an article about a year ago about a European lamp analysis kit that could be taken to the field. Do you know if this is available in the U.S. or can it be purchased from Europe?
There's some equipment out there. We're working on this. Yeah, that article from Europe was showed. I think his name was what was his name? Adrian, or showed a young man out there doing lamp in the field. And my technician and I would certainly like to get to that point. That little piece of equipment that he has out there in the field costs $15,000, wow. And that's a hindrance to doing this. There's another company that we're working with now that's looking at making more like an $800 or $1,000 machine, and they're still a little bit in their growing pains. But if we can get that little machine out there at a fairly reasonable cost, then I think we could get this done more on a local level, which would be great, because I don't think the central lab would approach. If I had to take flowers into my lab from, say, a major growing district where people had picked them, I think we'd be overwhelmed on a warm, sunny day sometimes. So yeah, that's definitely the approach, and I think we're going to see this, but I think it's going to take a few years to be able to get there.
Okay. Will there be a danger of over-thinning if lime sulfur is used for fire blight control at bloom?
Tim, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, since we were the ones up here in Washington that use lime sulfur so much, there's always a danger of over-thinning, but it's relatively rare. It's rare enough that the growers take the benefit of the blossom thinning as a necessary step to get return bloom the next year and to cut down on the amount of thinning and to improve the fruit quality. It's maybe one time out of 10 that the grower uses lime sulfur and oil, they overthin. But most of the time when they think they've overthinned, they have a wonderful crop because they've thinned properly. It's only once in a blue moon that they overthin and have a crop reduction.
Yeah, I'll add to that some of these thinners like lime sulfur partly are sensitive to humidity, and so they've been adopted out here in the semi-arid areas as thinning agents. But we've been working with them here in Corvallis, which isn't so arid during the springtime, and we have pretty high humidity. And with lime sulfur, we've been thinning, but I haven't seen a case where we've over-thinned yet. Now, just contrast that. This isn't an organic practice, but we did some thinning with ammonium thiosulfate, which is an alternative thinning agent that's basically a fertilizer you spray on the flowers and it burns out flowers. And it's very sensitive to humidity. And we sprayed it on some trees at recommended rates, and we didn't get any fruit. So we did overthin severely with that, and I have not seen that with lime sulfur. So lime sulfur is giving us a nice thin, but it's leaving fruit on the tree. And I'll say on the ammonium thiosulfate trees, we didn't get any fire blight, but we didn't have any fruit either. So there you go.
So this lime sulfur and oil is an organic program that has been wholeheartedly accepted by the conventional growers. So there's a lot of conventional fruit that's being thinned this way.
Okay. Oxidate brand hydrogen peroxide is being claimed to be an effective non-antibiotic organic fire blight control. Have you trialed this type of product, or do you know anything about it?
Yeah, I do. I tend to sort of downplay those materials, and the reason is that they are effective as a flash disinfectant. So I always contrast this. If you had a potato storage that was empty and you wanted to clean the concrete, you could spray oxidate on the concrete and you would clean it up. The problem is with you spray oxidate on plants and things like that, they lose their punch like within a few seconds. And so if we spray, we have an Erwinia population on stigmas, and we spray the oxidate on there, we might get a few cells of the pathogen that are sort of sitting exposed, but the pathogen is down in the nooks and crannies of the stigmas, and that oxidate won't last long enough to get those cells. So we could dent the population on the flowers with some oxidate, but we're not going to eliminate the pathogen from the tree or have a long effective residual period after we've applied the material. The material is going to be gone as an effective material within a few seconds. So that's how we look at it. I think there would be the time that you did a trial and it was, say, everything was just primed for infection, and you got out there and you sprayed oxidate, and would you see an effect? Yeah, you might see an effect. But there's going to be other times where you probably don't see an effect.
I decided not to work on it because of the results of the work in California a few years ago. That the product like that, I don't know if it was oxidate, but it was a similar product. It did cause quite a bit of marking and damage on the fruit. And so it's possibly dangerous to the fruit to use it, to the point where it wasn't worthwhile, in my opinion, to do any research on it.
Okay. Do you know if Provista would be suitable to use during the delayed dormant spray? This would reduce the overall copper load.
Well, we don't have that data. I think at the price, we don't have that data. We're just starting to work with the material in California this year. We don't have a label, so we the most we're going to do is put on some small plots, and we did not put it on for the delay dormant timing. So the company at this point is more interested in it as a more of an in-season bloom material because of the lack of russet potential. However, there's no reason to think, as long as there's no reason to think it won't work, but we just don't have that data. However, it does have significantly less copper. We don't know if that actually will be a factor in whether it's effective as a delay dormant treatment, really driving, really covering the buds well, and so we just don't have that data to tell you one way or another.
Okay, this question is from a small organic grower in southern Illinois. What treatments are recommended after trees are infected with fire blight? We have pear trees that are infected.
Well, there aren't
removal of the cankers.
Yeah, cut it out.
At this time of year, you don't need to follow the directions you see in the literature. You just need to remove the canker at a good horticultural point below where you see the damage. You don't have to go 12 to 18 inches. And all
this is a winter cut.
Yeah, this is in the winter.
Yeah.
Because the organism is just near the edge of that canker. It's not 12 or 14 inches further.
But a summer cut, you would want to go a foot to 2 foot below the leading edge of the canker.
Yeah, and realize that the bacteria have already gone past that, but you're trying to get the bulk of the bacteria out of the tree.
Okay, here's another question from a grower. We often use micronized wettable sulfur for powdery mildew control soon after bloom on apples. Any evidence of how these late bloom, post-bloom sulfur applications might affect the blossom protect yeast? And also, what about potassium bicarbonate or caligreen effects on the yeast?
Well, you saw our slides there where we're putting on lime sulfur on top of the yeast, and it did have an effect, but it didn't knock it off completely. And my basic recommendation is realizing that people have to do this, come in with other materials for other reasons, is if you can get, say, a window of 2 to 3 days to let the biological organism get itself sort of set up on the flower. At that point, they're going to be pretty hard to knock off. You might ding them a little bit, you might knock their population down a little bit, but I don't think you're ever going to eradicate them, especially with a sulfur treatment or with a caligreen treatment. I just don't think that there's enough potency in either of those materials to knock Aurea basidium off a flower once it's got on there.
Okay. When using a straight lime sulfur for thinning, is there a minimum rate per 100 that would be a threshold when no oil is being applied with it?
This gets into the art of thinning, and I mostly take my advice from various pomologists that work in the Yakima Valley when you get to those higher rates of lime sulfur. And so it's kind of interesting in Washington that up around Wenatchee, where Harold Austinson introduced the lime sulfur plus fish oil treatment, each at 2%. Down in the Yakima Valley, they don't use as much fish oil, and they run those numbers up somewhat higher. And I think that there's an art and experience factor there. I know that it depends a lot on cultivar and also on number of flowers there. So the higher numbers tend to go on things like Fuji when they got a big bloom coming, and I would say that more typical rates without fish oil are down in that 3 to 6% range, and those rates that get up above 6%, and I've heard even up to as high as 12%, are really for situations where there's a lot of flowers that have to be taken off the tree.
Okay, here's a question regarding EU-compliant growers in the Northwest. Are they utilizing any of the non-antibiotic methods that you're describing?
Tim, you want to get that? That's mostly your folks up there north of Wenatchee.
Yeah, they are. Now, what we utilize mostly is the fact that fire blight isn't commonly in the neighborhood. And they would use copper and the now Blossom Protect will be an important part of their program, but prior to this, they had A506 and Bloom-Time Biological, those sorts of things to protect them if there was fire blight in the region. But
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Generally, we just escape fire blight. We don't have fire blight every year in every block. In fact, it's maybe 10% on a bad year. So we've just planted our trees in an area where fire blight is not very common, and they're pretty vigilant in cutting it out if it shows up. And they rely on luck more than anything.
Yeah, I was out in a couple organic blocks north of Wenatchee last summer, and they were using blight band bloom time programs, and they were very interested in the yeast product, and I'm sure they're probably interested in the coppers. If it say it was organic bosque pear, these were pear growers, and if it was organic bosque pear, you're probably going to be putting on low rates of copper through the bloom and even after bloom to sort of it enhances the russet a little bit. So copper is widely used in those kind of blocks.
Okay. Do you have threshold levels for Erwinia yet, where if you used a lamp, a grower could make a decision not to treat even though weather conditions were conducive because there were not enough bacteria to be a problem?
Yeah, I'm nervous about that. I had a grower that we cooperated with, and this was again a grower up in north of Wenatchee a couple of years ago, and he wanted to use it that way, and so we did the lamp work for him, and we didn't find it, and then in the end I asked him, we said, well, what happened? And he says, well, I had some late blight, show up, and this was in bosque, and if it gets going in bosque, it makes kind of a mess. And I think our indication now is that it helps to guide people through a spray program or when the pathogen is out there. And so really, if we find it, if we get any positives at all, that's a threshold that you need to be worrying about the disease. In many blocks, and I think California is perhaps an exception. Like Tim says, we get up here in the Northwest, we can go through many blocks and not find it at all. And we're then telling people to follow the model and go with the model thresholds, because the model thresholds are really going to tell you when the pathogen is exploding out there. And so if we didn't find it at all and it was cool, then the grower would end up not spraying at all for fire blight. If we did find it, then they may put on they may adjust their own thresholds as to where they want to decide when the model gets to what point. If it gets to a somewhat lower point of heat unit accumulation, that they would put on a treatment at that point. But I've been a little bit nervous about that, and like I say, LAMP has been primarily a research tool at this point, and it's been painting some really nice pictures and been very useful. But, I guess it's a research question down the road as to being able to set that threshold.
Okay. Are the environmental conditions Stefan Kuhns had in Germany similar to either the Pacific Northwest or the Northeast? Or what
No.
area would it be similar to?
No.
Okay.
They're not.
I would say that they're closer to Michigan, something like that, upstate New York, than to the west. In that area, Lake Constance, Germany.
Okay. Are there any host trees that carry fire blight that are non-fruiting?
Yes. Hawthorn has been implicated in Great Britain. There's a number of hosts that are susceptible that generally don't get fire blight because they bloom at odd times in relation to the weather. There's ornamentals like pyracantha that often get fire blight in certain climate areas. So yeah, it doesn't appear that hawthorn is infected commonly in most of the United States, but that's probably the original host in North America was hawthorn.
Okay.
Yeah, we looked at this a couple of years ago. So Rachel and Tim are talking about disease hosts. So that would be other rosaceous plants that actually host the disease. And then we looked at really other flowers that could actually support bacterial growth on the flowers that wouldn't get the disease, and so the bee could drop it off, say, in a cherry orchard, and would the fire blight pathogen grow on a cherry flower? And the answer is yeah, they do, but we kind of downplay the significance of it because the fire blight pathogen wouldn't overwinter in a cherry orchard. But we talk about why does, like on Rachel's data there, where the curves go up late in the season, and how the pathogen kind of builds as the summer starts to come on. And so you're probably increasing your inoculum out there on, say, you could, in our area would be like, say, blackberry hedges or wild blackberry hedges, or even a cherry orchard or something. It could add to the amount of inoculum as you go through this, goes through the spring. How significant that is, I'm not really sure, but the fire blight pathogen will grow on other flowers, and so we just sort of add it. And so risk, really early in bloom, when pear flowers are just opening, the only place the fire blight pathogen can really come from is an old canker, and it's got to build in the orchard. But then as we get to later times, like rat tail flower and things like that, well, then the fire blight pathogen can kind of be making its presence established out there in the landscape, and you could get an inoculum that comes into those really late flowers from multiple places, I think.
A bigger problem that we see is not really related to other host type plants commercially, but if you have abandoned trees, non-farmed trees in close proximity to your commercial orchard that are not being treated, of course, the trade-off is they're generally not being fertilized and their vigor's not kept up, so they may not be as susceptible. But if you do have lots and lots of sources of feral trees, then that could affect, because insects move back and forth, and these aren't being taken care of. In fire blight, I don't think we have the data that we do for insects and something like pear scab, but as far as necessitating extra treatments, but they can be a source of inoculum.
Okay, thank you. We are running out of time. Did you want to just say one more thing there? Did I interrupt anybody? Okay.
Organic or conventional, the most important factor of fire blight control is sanitation of the neighborhood. And whether it's your neighbor or your own orchard or abandoned trees nearby, if you have a fire blight canker, that spreads the bacteria in the neighborhood very rapidly, and one canker can affect an area of 3 or 4 acres. So it's difficult to clean it up, but that's the most important thing.
The other thing is cultivar differences are huge. So, for example, if you have even one tree or a couple of trees of something like Forel or Concord varieties that are known to be very susceptible, and they show infection. I've had trees all around one Concord tree wipe out, caused me to have to cut out other varieties in my variety trials because of the the great susceptibility of the Concord tree. So which cultivars you choose is very important if you're very limited on how you can control blight.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to thank everyone for their questions. I'd like to thank you so much, Ken, Rachel, and Tim, for speaking to us and giving this presentation and answering questions. And thanks to everyone for joining us.